Imagine this. You are standing in front of an ancient door. It's made of weathered oak, splintered by time, yet held together by something stronger than nails or hinges mystery. You hesitate, your hand hovering just above the cold, rusted handle. You feel it, an almost magnetic pull, as if your entire existence is urging you to open it. And yet, a voice inside whispers, "What if you be not ready to know what lies beyond?" Because this is not just any door. It is the hidden entrance to the labyrinth of your psyche, where long-forgotten forces have shaped who you've become long before you ever had a say. Forces determined not just by your choices, your traumas, or your culture, but by something far older, far stranger, the moment you were born. We are told we are blank slates, free to invent ourselves in any way we choose. That the time and place of our birth is nothing more than a biological accident, a date printed on a certificate, and nothing more. But what if that's the most beautiful lie we've ever believed? What if, as Carl Jung once suggested in his exploration of synchronicity, there are no true coincidences in the unfolding of your life? That the moment you emerged from the womb was not random, but rather a cosmic fingerprint, an encrypted message shaping the very fabric of your personality, your unconscious drives, your shadow, and your potential for transcendence. You've probably heard vague claims before. Oh, Capricorns are disciplined. Or Leos crave attention, the kind of empty caricatures found on the back pages of magazines. But this is not that. Jung wasn't interested in cheap fortune-telling. He sought the mythic, the archetypal structures underlying existence itself. So here is the paradox. Science tells us that the time of your birth is nothing but a quirk of chance. Yet Jung's work suggests that it could be a mirror held up to your soul, reflecting back to you hidden truths about your instincts, your fears, your talents, and your fate. Do you feel it now, that shiver of cognitive dissonance? That tightening in your chest as your rational mind protests, while the deeper, quieter part of you, perhaps your unconscious, leans in closer, whispering, "What if it's true?" Consider this. Why do some people, born in the dead of winter, seem more introspective, cautious, and brooding, while others, arriving with the first bloom of spring, exude warmth, optimism, and spontaneity? Is it merely upbringing, or could there be something ancient, perhaps even biological, at work? Could the season of your birth leave an imprint on your psyche, resonating through subtle environmental factors, light exposure, temperature, maternal hormones affecting your temperament long before you uttered your first word? But then Jung complicates this further, as he always does. For him, it's not just biology, it's mythos. It's the idea that you are born into a particular time for a reason, that the universe is not indifferent to your existence, but intimately involved in your becoming. This is where the unsettling paradox sharpens its teeth. If your birth month does indeed carry secret knowledge about who you are, then how much of you is truly yours? How much of your personality is a free creation, and how much is a pre-written code waiting to be decrypted? Are you the author of your life, or merely the reader? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, if this secret knowledge has always been available, why have you ignored it? A world you inhabit has trained you to dismiss such notions as superstition, pseudoscience, or worse, narcissistic self-indulgence. But Jung challenged that dismissal, insisting that even the symbols we scoff at are powerful, not because they predict events, but because they reveal archetypal forces within us. The zodiac, the birth chart, even your birth month, they are mirrors, not maps. Reflections of unconscious patterns that shape your emotional landscape in ways you may never have consciously noticed. So, what if you dared to look into that mirror? What if your birth month is not just a trivial fact, but a key one you've left rusting on the shelf with skepticism? Ask yourself, do you really know who you are? Or have you only been scratching at the surface, mistaking the mask for the face? The answer is not simple. It never is. But the door is there. The handle is cold, waiting. And as you reach for it, heart-pounding, breath shallow, you realize that stepping through will not just change how you see yourself. It will obliterate everything you thought you knew about human nature, free will, and the timeless dance between fate and freedom. So go ahead, grasp the handle. Because what your birth month secretly reveals about your personality is far more profound, more unsettling, and more liberating than you've ever imagined. And once you open that door, there is no going back. You grip the handle and step through. But instead of finding simple answers, neat descriptions of personality traits mapped to months, you encounter something far more disorienting. The realization that your entire concept of self might be rooted in forces you've never consciously acknowledged. Carl Jung would have called this confrontation an encounter with the numinous, the overwhelming, awe-inspiring presence of something both foreign and familiar, something that transcends rational explanation, but is undeniably real. And this is the hidden problem. We are born, we live, and we die under the illusion that we are fully conscious authors of our own identity, while the vast machinery of the unconscious, the ancient archetypes collective, myths and biological rhythms, silently dictates the shape of our desires, fears, and actions. Jung saw this most clearly in his concept of the collective unconscious, a shared psychic substrate populated by archetypes, universal symbols, and motifs that predate any individual life. Your birth month, then, is not just a date. It is an initiation into a particular set of archetypal energies. These are not the sanitized stereotypes of pop astrology, but primordial forces that have coiled themselves around your psyche from the moment you inhaled your first breath. Yet modern society, driven by rationalism and materialism, scoffs at such notions. We are told that meaning is constructed, that personality is the product of genetics and environment alone. This reductionist view, championed by scientific positivism, leaves little room for the symbolic, the transcendent, or the inexplicable. The consequence? A culture severed from its own mythic roots. Herein lies the philosophical fracture that defines our era. We have divorced ourselves from the very symbols that once helped us navigate existence. Nietzsche diagnosed this condition over a century ago when he declared, "God is dead." But Jung extended this diagnosis further, arguing that when we killed the gods, we also shattered the symbolic frameworks that gave coherence to our inner lives. Now, untethered from myth and ritual, we stumble through existence, clinging to the illusion of control while repressing the gnawing suspicion that much of who we are has been scripted in ways we don't understand. Is it any wonder, then, that modern individuals feel anxious, alienated, and lost? You were born into a world that taught you to dismiss the significance of your birth month as coincidence, or worse, superstition. But what if this dismissal is a defense mechanism, a way of shielding yourself from the terrifying possibility that your life is shaped by forces beyond your comprehension? Consider the ancient civilizations, the Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Chinese, who all meticulously tracked the stars and seasons, believing that the moment of birth linked a person to cosmic rhythms. Jung argued that these systems persisted not because they were scientifically precise, but because they resonated with deep psychological truths. They externalized what he called psychological facts, subjective realities that, regardless of empirical validation, shape human experience in profound ways. This is why Jung took astrology seriously, not as a deterministic blueprint, but as a symbolic language that mapped the interplay between the psyche and the cosmos. In his words, we are born at a given moment, in a given place, and like vintage years of wine, we have the qualities of the year and of the season of which we are born. Let that sink in. Your birth month may encode within you specific tendencies, not because the stars dictate your fate, but because the symbolic resonance of that time, its light, its myths, its collective moods etch themselves into your developing psyche. Yet the hidden problem is even deeper. Jung warned that when we ignore these symbolic dimensions, we risk psychic fragmentation. Parts of ourselves, our instincts, emotions, and potentials remain disowned, buried in the shadow of the unconscious, festering in the dark until they erupt in destructive patterns of self-sabotage, depression, or existential emptiness. You might scoff and say, "But I know who I am." But do you? Or have you simply accepted the identity handed to you by cultural expectations, family narratives, and social conditioning, while ignoring the archetypal forces that shaped you long before you could speak? This is the philosophical root of the problem, the myth of the autonomous self. Modernity has conditioned us to believe that we are isolated egos, self-contained and self-determined. But Jung, much like Viktor Frankl, and even Schopenhauer before him, argued that meaning and identity are not purely constructed by will, but discovered through an encounter with something greater than the self-something transcendent. Your birth month, then, becomes a symbol of that encounter, a clue in the puzzle of your life that you've been trained to overlook. But the stakes of this ignorance are high. When we refuse to engage with the symbolic dimension of our existence, we become vulnerable to what Jung called psychic inflation, the unconscious takeover of the self by repressed archetypes that then manifest as anxiety, addiction, compulsive behaviors, or blind conformity to social norms. This is not just a personal tragedy, but a collective one. As Aldous Huxley lamented, modern society has become a machinery of distraction, keeping individuals severed from their own inner depths, anesthetized by consumerism, entertainment, and superficial identities. Ask yourself, how much of who you are today is a conscious creation, and how much is the result of unconscious compliance with inherited patterns? The hidden problem is not that your birth month secretly influences your personality. That much is evident, but that you have been systematically conditioned to dismiss this influence, leaving you estranged from a vital part of yourself. But now, standing here, confronted by this realization, you feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. Everything you've believed about identity, free will, and destiny begins to crack. And in that crack, the first glimpse of light. The question now is, what are the consequences of continuing to ignore this hidden dimension of yourself? That is where we must go next, into the heart of the unseen forces that shape not only your personality, but the very structure of society itself. You step deeper into the labyrinth, the walls closing in, the air thick with the weight of everything you've never questioned. And now, you begin to feel it not just as an abstract idea, but as an embodied truth. The silent consequences of ignoring the hidden forces at play in your life. Because here is the unspoken reality. What you do not consciously integrate will unconsciously dominate you. Carl Jung warned of this with relentless precision. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is the most insidious of all consequences, the quiet surrender of agency, the passive drift through a life you never truly authored, but merely inhabited. If your birth month marks the initiation into specific archetypal energies, then ignoring this initiation leaves you vulnerable to their unconscious expression. Rather than working with these forces, understanding them, channeling them, you become their puppet. You may think of yourself as pragmatic, grounded, immune to such esoteric influences. But consider the subtle patterns in your own life. Why do certain seasons lift your spirits, while others cloak you in inexplicable melancholy? Why do some interpersonal dynamics feel instantly familiar, as if you've played out these relational scripts before, countless times, despite your conscious attempts to change? Modern neuroscience offers a partial glimpse into this mystery. Studies in circadian biology reveal that the season of your birth can influence your temperament and susceptibility to mood disorders. For example, those born in winter months show higher incidences of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, while spring and summer births correlate with increased tendencies toward novelty-seeking and risk-taking behaviors. But these are only surface-level manifestations of something deeper, an echo of the ancient rhythms that Jung argued shape the archetypal layers of the psyche. Left unexamined, these inherited patterns calcify into what the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm called character armor, rigid defenses designed to protect the fragile ego from the terrifying complexity of the unconscious. The unseen consequence is that you begin to live a life of quiet repetition, mistaking habit for choice, compulsion for desire. You fall in love with the same kinds of people, sabotage your progress in eerily similar ways, wrestle with the same insecurities, all the while believing you're making independent decisions. But beneath it all is the blueprint etched in your psyche at the moment of your birth, shaped by the interplay of biological rhythms, cultural myths, and unconscious archetypes. Now magnify this on a societal scale. Entire cultures, too, are governed by their own birth myths, the collective stories they tell about origins, destiny, and identity. But in the modern age, these have been replaced by the sterile narratives of progress, productivity, and technological domination. The symbolic, the archetypal, the mythic all dismissed as relics of a primitive past. Yet, what has this rejection cost us? In severing ourselves from these symbolic frameworks, we have unleashed a plague of existential malaise. Depression, anxiety, and the epidemic of meaninglessness are not merely clinical conditions. They are the psychic consequences of living in a world that denies the very structures that once oriented the human soul. Jean-Paul Sartre, in his Existentialist Rebellion, declared that existence precedes essence, insisting that human beings must invent their own meaning in an indifferent universe. But Jung offered a more haunting perspective. Even if we deny essence, essence does not deny us. The archetypes persist, the unconscious continues its work in the shadows, and the forces encoded at the moment of our birth quietly shape our instincts, longings, and fears. To ignore this is to become alienated not only from yourself, but from the very substratum of your humanity. And so you go on, performing roles, chasing goals, wearing masks you never chose, all the while haunted by a gnawing dissatisfaction you cannot quite name. You might look around and see the same pattern in others. Colleagues numbing themselves with work, friends cycling through shallow relationships, family members clinging to identities that no longer fit but feel too terrifying to relinquish. This is the collective symptom of a world that has lost its symbolic literacy. And here is the cruelest irony. In dismissing the ancient wisdom of birth charts, archetypes, and cosmic rhythms as superstition, modern society has not freed itself from their influence. It has only rendered itself blind to them. You still live by these forces. You are still shaped by them. But without the language or rituals to consciously engage them, they manifest in distorted, compulsive, and often destructive ways. This is why Jung insisted that psychological integration, the process of becoming whole, requires a confrontation with the symbolic dimensions of existence. It is not enough to analyze your behaviors through the cold lens of reason. You must also descend into the mythic underworld of your own psyche, facing the archetypal energies that have governed you in silence. But most never make this descent. They live on the surface, distracted by the endless churn of consumerism, technology, and social performance, never realizing that their most profound potentials remain buried beneath layers of cultural conditioning and unconscious fear. And perhaps the most tragic consequence of all is this. When you deny the symbolic meaning of your birth, you also deny the possibility of your rebirth. Because to confront the archetypal patterns encoded in your birth is not to be trapped by them, it is to engage them consciously, to integrate them, to transform them into sources of wisdom and strength. But as long as you remain unaware, as long as you dismiss your birth month as irrelevant trivia, you forfeit this possibility. You remain a prisoner of patterns you neither understand nor control. And so the question hangs in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Will you continue to live as an unconscious expression of forces you refuse to acknowledge? Or will you awaken to the deeper truths that have been shaping your life from the very beginning. The path forward demands nothing less than a rebellion against everything you've been taught about identity, choice, and freedom. But how does one stage such a rebellion? How do you break free from the unseen architecture of your own psyche? That is where we must go next, into the radical, unsettling territory of liberation. You stand now at the edge of a precipice, the old self behind you, its familiar habits and unquestioned assumptions, and before you, a vast and disorienting space, the unknown. But here is the most crucial truth of all. Freedom is not given. It is seized. And breaking free from the invisible architecture of your psyche requires an act of rebellion, a revolt against the internalized beliefs that have kept you asleep to the deeper forces shaping your life. Carl Jung called this rebellion the process of individuation, the courageous and often painful journey of becoming who you truly are. Beyond the persona, beyond the roles imposed by family, society, and even the unconscious scripts etched into you at birth. It is not about rejecting your birth month, your archetypes, or your inherent tendencies, but about integrating them, transforming them from unconscious compulsions into conscious strengths. This is the paradox at the heart of your liberation. You must first accept that you are not entirely free, that your psyche is layered with ancient patterns and influences beyond your control. But it is precisely through this radical acceptance that you gain the possibility of true freedom. Consider those who have walked this path before you, the outliers, the misfits, the mystics, and the revolutionaries. Jung himself rebelled against the intellectual orthodoxy of his time, breaking with Freud to forge a new vision of the psyche that honored the symbolic, the spiritual, and the archetypal. Nietzsche defied conventional morality, proclaiming the death of God not as nihilistic despair, but as an invitation to create new values. Viktor Frankl, amid the horrors of the concentration camps, discovered that even in the most extreme conditions, humans possessed the freedom to choose their attitude, to find meaning. These were not comfortable rebellions. They demanded everything. And now it is your turn. The first act of rebellion is awareness. You must become a detective of your own psyche, tracing the hidden patterns linked to the season of your birth. Reflect. What are the myths, moods, and elemental qualities associated with your birth month? How might these have shaped your unconscious tendencies? Were you born in the heat of summer, predisposed to expansiveness and risk-taking? Or in the austerity of winter, inclined toward introspection and self-preservation? But awareness alone is insufficient. You must also cultivate the courage to confront your shadow, the disowned aspects of your personality, many of which may be rooted in the unintegrated archetypes linked to your birth time. Perhaps your birth imbued you with a predisposition toward nurturing, yet you disown this tenderness out of fear of vulnerability. Or perhaps you possess latent aggression, buried beneath a mask of social niceness. The rebellion is in reclaiming these exiled parts, in standing naked before yourself, stripped of all pretense. But how? Jung would say, through active imagination, a practice of dialoguing with the unconscious through symbols, dreams, art, and reflection. Rather than passively succumbing to the unseen forces within, you engage them, interrogate them, invite them into conscious awareness. For instance, you might begin keeping a journal of dreams, noticing recurring themes, symbols, or emotional tones. Pay attention. Are there seasonal motifs that echo the time of your birth? Does your psyche instinctively gravitate toward imagery linked to your birth month's elemental qualities, fiery, earthy, watery, or airy? This is not mystical nonsense. It is psychological alchemy. By engaging your unconscious in this way, you transmute raw, unconscious material into refined consciousness. You transform destiny into choice. But the rebellion does not end in the solitary confines of your inner world. It must also manifest outwardly in how you live, relate, and create. Jung insisted that individuation demands a dialectical relationship between the self and the world that as you transform inwardly, your external life must also shift. This may mean making bold, uncomfortable choices, leaving relationships that no longer align with your authentic self, changing careers that stifle your soul, or breaking from cultural norms that contradict your inner truth. It means embodying the archetypes that you once repressed, allowing them to animate your life in conscious, life-giving ways. For example, if you were born under the cold, reflective skies of January and have long feared your innate solitude, your rebellion may be to embrace that solitude as a source of wisdom and creativity rather than a burden. Or, if born in the vitality of spring but conditioned to suppress your spontaneity, your act of defiance may be to reclaim joy and risk as essential parts of your existence. This rebellion is not about conforming to simplistic zodiac stereotypes, but about using the symbolic resonance of your birth as a portal into deeper self-understanding and empowerment. But beware, the world may resist your rebellion. As Jung noted, society often punishes those who deviate from collective norms. There will be pressure to conform, to shrink back into the familiar persona, to relegate your archetypal exploration to the realm of fantasy. Yet, this is the crucible of true individuation, the willingness to stand alone, to bear the loneliness of self-authorship. And here is where the rebellion becomes not merely personal, but spiritual. Because in breaking free from unconscious identification with your birth's archetypal script, you enact what Jung saw as the highest goal of human life, the realization of the self, the totality of your being harmonized and whole, no longer fragmented by repression or denial. This is liberation not from your birth, but through it. Your birth month is no longer a passive fact, but an active symbol, a key you have chosen to use rather than ignore. And as you emerge from the labyrinth breathless, but awake, you realize that the rebellion has brought you not to chaos, but to a new kind of order, a life lived in conscious alignment with both your inner nature and the greater cosmos. But one final question remains, perhaps the most important of all. What ultimate truth lies at the center of this entire journey? What is the deepest realization that awaits when you no longer fear the forces that shaped you, but welcome them as allies in your quest for wholeness? That is where we must go now, to the final revelation, the insight that will forever alter how you see yourself, your life, and the very nature of existence. You stand at the center now, where all paths converge, where every assumption, every mask, every unconscious pattern you have carried dissolves in the light of something far more expansive than identity, personality, or even archetype. And here, at last, the ultimate truth is revealed. You are never meant to escape your fate. You are meant to fulfill it. The greatest misunderstanding of modern life is the belief that freedom lies in rejecting all that we have inherited, in discarding the circumstances of our birth, in severing ourselves from history, biology, myth, and archetype. But Carl Jung, in his deepest insight, saw through this illusion. True freedom, he realized, is not found in running from the structures that shaped you, but in consciously participating in them, transforming what was once unconscious fate into awakened destiny. This is the ultimate reconciliation, the paradox that you are both determined and free. Your birth month, with all its symbolic and biological resonances, does indeed influence you. It colors your instincts, your moods, your relational patterns. But it is not a prison, it is a doorway. The final, most powerful realization is this: you are always more than what you are told you are. You are not simply an accumulation of traits assigned by the time of your birth. You are not a pawn of cosmic forces, nor are you merely the product of genetic and environmental determinism. You are the meeting point, the crucible where cosmic rhythms, ancestral myths, biological impulses, and conscious will converge. This is what Jung meant by the self, not the ego with its petty concerns, but the totality of your being, the part of you that includes both the known and the unknown, the light and the shadow, the inherited and the chosen. The moment you realize this, everything changes. No longer must you fear the unseen forces that have shaped you. No longer must you live in anxious denial of your archetypal inheritance. Instead, you can now integrate these forces, weaving them into the tapestry of a life lived with purpose, intention, and authenticity. You were not born in January, or May, or September by accident. Whether or not you believe in the literal power of astrology is beside the point. What matters is that your birth month connects you to a symbolic system, a mythic resonance that, when consciously engaged, can illuminate the hidden corners of your psyche. And when you open yourself to this symbolic dimension, you awaken to a new way of being, not as a fragmented, reactive self, but as a mythic self, aware that your life is part of a much larger story. A story written not only in the language of DNIN neurons, but in the timeless grammar of symbols, archetypes, and cosmic rhythms. But here is the most extraordinary revelation of all. The symbolic system that shaped you is not fixed. It is participatory. You are not simply a character in a story authored by the stars. You are also a co-author. Your birth month may offer a set of raw materials, energies, tendencies, potentials, but it is through your conscious engagement with these materials that you sculpt the unique masterpiece of your life. This is why Jung rejected both rigid determinism and shallow voluntarism. He saw that the path to wholeness is not about denying your archetypal inheritance, nor about blindly surrendering to it, but about engaging it creatively. Think of the great artists, the mystics, the innovators. They did not flee from the forces that shaped them. They collaborated with them. They turned their psychological raw materials, their wounds, longings, and inherited patterns into works of beauty, insight, and transcendence. This is the path that is now open to you. You no longer need to fear the parts of yourself that seem mysterious, irrational, or predestined. You can now approach them with curiosity, reverence, and creativity, knowing that they are not obstacles to your freedom, but essential components of it. Because here is the secret Jung understood. Freedom is not the absence of structure. It is the conscious engagement with it. You are free not because you were born without influences, but because you can choose how to respond to those influences. You can choose how to integrate the archetypes, how to embody the symbolic energies of your birth, how to turn what was once unconscious fate into conscious destiny. And when you do this, something remarkable happens. The world around you begins to change, not because the stars have shifted, but because you have. Your relationships deepen because you are no longer acting out unconscious scripts, but engaging others with presence and authenticity. Your work becomes more meaningful because it is no longer driven by compulsion or fear, but animated by purpose. Your inner life becomes richer because you have embraced the full spectrum of your being, the parts shaped by your birth and the parts forged by your will. And in this embrace, you experience what Jung called individuation, the realization of yourself as a unique, integrated, and whole being, aligned with both the inner and the outer cosmos. You see now that your birth was not a random event, but a sacred initiation. The date, the season, the symbolic resonance of your birth month, all of it was the first page of a story that only you can write. And now, with eyes open and soul awakened, you hold the pen. But this realization comes with a final responsibility. You can no longer pretend that your life is meaningless, that your choices don't matter, that you are a passive victim of circumstances. To awaken to your symbolic inheritance is also to accept the profound obligation to live consciously, to walk the path of individuation with courage, creativity, and integrity. This is the ultimate truth. Your birth month does reveal something essential about your personality, but not in the simplistic way you are taught to believe. It reveals not who you must be, but who you might become. It offers not a script, but an invitation. And now, standing at the threshold of this realization, the question is no longer, what does my birth month say about me? The question is, what will I do with what it says? Will you deny it, repress it, ignore it, as so many do? Or will you accept the invitation, step into the symbolic story of your life, and become not just the product of your birth, but the co-creator of your destiny? The choice, as always, is yours. But know this, once you have seen the door, you can never again pretend it is not there. And somewhere, deep within you, a voice you've long ignored is already whispering, step through. If this journey into your psyche sparked something within you, don't forget to subscribe for more deep, transformative insights. And if you found value here, like this video, it helps others discover these powerful ideas too. Your awakening starts now. Stay curious, stay courageous,